In the oppressive heat of 1850s Georgia, Grace, a slave at Darlington Hall, possesses a voice with the power to transform hearts and destinies. When she reluctantly performs for the master's guests, her haunting song awakens something profound in Mr. Thorne and ignites forbidden feelings between Grace and his son Micah. As they dare to imagine a future together, they must confront the violent resistance of a society unwilling to change. But before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The summer heat was unbearable at Darlington Hall, the grand mansion that stood as a symbol of wealth in the heart of Georgia. It was 1850, and the southern elite gathered for one of Mr. Thorne's famous parties. The drawing room glowed with candlelight, the air heavy with expensive perfume and the sound of forced laughter. Grace wiped the sweat from her brow as she balanced another tray of champagne glasses. At 25, she had spent most of her life serving the Thorne family. Her simple cotton dress was damp from the kitchen heat, her feet ached from hours of standing, but she knew better than to complain. "More champagne here," called a woman in a blue silk dress, waving her empty glass without even looking at Grace. "Yes, ma'am," Grace replied softly, her eyes downcast as she had been taught. Never look them in the eye. Never speak unless spoken to. These were the rules that kept her safe. Mr. Harold Thorne, the master of Darlington Hall, was a tall man with graying hair and cold blue eyes. At 55, he had built his fortune on cotton and the backs of the slaves who worked his land. Tonight he stood in the center of the room, laughing loudly at something one of his banker friends had said. "A fine evening, isn't it?" said Mrs. Thorne to her guests, a woman 20 years younger than her husband, with golden hair pinned elegantly atop her head. She wore diamonds at her throat and wrists, symbols of her husband's wealth. Grace moved silently through the crowd, refilling glasses and clearing empty plates. She had mastered the art of being invisible. That was until Mrs. Eleanor Davis, one of the guests, noticed her. "My, what a pretty face she has," Mrs. Davis remarked, peering at Grace through her spectacles. "Does she have any talents besides serving drinks?" The room quieted a bit as attention turned to Grace, who froze, tray in hand. "Talents?" Mr. Thorne chuckled. "They're not kept for their talents, Eleanor." "But surely they must do something for entertainment," Mrs. Davis insisted, fanning herself. "Can she sing, dance? I've heard some of them have quite beautiful voices." Mr. Thorne looked at Grace with mild curiosity, as if seeing her for the first time. "Well, girl, can you sing?" Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Her mother had taught her songs from their homeland, songs passed down through generations. But after her mother was whipped for singing one evening, Grace had kept her voice silent. I know some songs, sir," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well then," Mr. Thorne waved his hand, "let's hear one. Entertain my guests." Grace set down her tray, her hands shaking. The room full of wealthy white faces read at her, some amused, others simply curious. She felt like an animal in a cage expected to perform. From across the room she caught the eye of Micah Thorne, the master's son. At 27, Micah was different from his father. His eyes were kind, his face often troubled when he witnessed the treatment of the slaves. He gave her a small nod, as if to encourage her. Grace took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The song came from somewhere deep inside her, a place she had locked away years ago. It was a lament, sung in the language of her ancestors, a song about loss and hope and stars that guided the way to freedom. Her voice started low, almost a whisper, but grew stronger with each note. The foreign words flowed from her lips like water, beautiful and mysterious. The chattering in the room gradually fell silent. The clinking of glasses stopped. All eyes were on Grace. When she opened her eyes, she saw something she never expected. Mr. Thorne, the man who owned her, had tears running down his face. Not tears of anger or even sympathy, but tears of someone who had been touched by something they couldn't understand. The song ended, and Grace stood in silence, her heart racing. Had she gone too far? Would there be punishment? Then, slowly, Mrs. Davis began to clap. Others joined in, the applause filling the room. Grace looked around in confusion. This was not the reaction she had expected. "My word!" Mrs. Davis exclaimed. "That was extraordinary. What was that language?" Grace hesitated before answering. "It's from Africa, ma'am. My mother taught me." "Well, it was quite moving," said another guest. "Wasn't it, Harold?" Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, quickly wiping his eyes. "Yes, quite," he said gruffly. "Now, back to work, girl." Grace returned to her duties, but something had changed in the room. People looked at her differently now, some with newfound respect, others with unease, as if her song had revealed something they didn't want to see. Later that night, as the party began to wind down, Grace slipped out to the garden for a moment of peace. The night air was cooler, and the stars shone brightly overhead. The same stars her mother had told her would guide their people to freedom someday. "You have an incredible voice." Grace spun around to find Mick R. standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. She immediately lowered her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Micah," she said, preparing to return to the house. "No, please don't go," Micah said quickly. "I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." Grace hesitated. Conversations with the master's son could be dangerous, but something in his voice made her stay. "Your song," Micah continued, "it wasn't just beautiful, it was powerful. I've never heard anything like it." "It's just a song from my mother's people," Grace explained. "It's more than that," Micah insisted. "You sang like your heart was on fire. I saw my father's face. You moved him, Grace. I've never seen him cry before." Grace looked up in surprise. "I didn't mean to upset him." "You didn't upset him. You touched something in him." Micah stepped closer. "I've watched you for years, you know, moving through rooms, always quiet, always careful. But tonight when you sang, I saw the real you." Grace felt her cheeks flush. No one had ever spoken to her this way, especially not someone like Micah Thorne. "Mr. Micah, I should go back inside. If your father—" "My father has retired for the evening," Micah assured her. "The guests are leaving. No one will miss you for a few minutes." They stood in silence for a moment, the night air filled with the sound of crickets and distant laughter from the Ho-Use. "I hate the way things are, Grace," Micah said suddenly, his voice low and intense. "The way my father treats you, the way all of them treat you, it's wrong." Grace didn't know how to respond. These were dangerous words, dangerous thoughts. "Things are as they are, Mr. Micah," she said carefully. "But they don't have to be," he insisted. "There are people fighting to change things, even here in the South." Grace had heard whispers of abolitionists, of underground railroads and freedom in the North, but such talk was forbidden. "You shouldn't say such things," she warned. "Not even to me." "I trust you," Micah said simply. "And after tonight, after your song, I think you might trust me too." Before Grace could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. One of the house servants, Thomas, appeared at the garden entrance. "Miss Grace, Mrs. Thorne is asking for you in the kitchen," he called out, his eyes darting suspiciously between her and Micah. "I'm coming," Grace called back. She turned to Micah. "I have to go." Micah nodded. "We'll talk again," he said, not as a question but a promise. Grace hurried back to the house, her mind racing. The evening had taken such an unexpected turn. First her song breaking through the walls the white folks had built around their hearts, and now this strange conversation with Micah Thorne. It was too much to make sense of. In the kitchen, Mrs. Thorne was giving instructions for the morning. She paused when Grace entered. "Ah, there you are," she said coolly, "the singing slave. You caused quite a stir tonight." "I'm sorry, Ma'am," Grace apologized automatically. "Don't be sorry," Mrs. Thorne said, surprising her. "The guests loved it. My husband has instructed that you're to sing again at our next gathering." Grace nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, ma'am. That will be all for tonight. Get some rest." As Grace made her way to the slave quarters behind the main house, she couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Something had changed tonight. She had used her voice for the first time in years, and somehow it had broken through walls she thought were unbreakable. In the small room she shared with 3 other women, Grace lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Micah's words echoed in her mind. "You sang like your heart was on fire." Had she? And what did it mean that Mr. Thorne had cried at her song? Sleep didn't come easily that night. Grace's mind was too full of questions, of possibilities she had never dared to consider before. and somewhere, in the darkest corner of her heart, a tiny flame of hope began to flicker. Morning came early at Darlington Hall. Grace was up before dawn, helping to prepare breakfast for the Thorne family. As she kneaded dough for biscuits, her hands working from memory, her mind returned to the events of the previous night. "I heard you sang for the master's guests," said Martha, an older woman who had been at Darlington Hall for 30 years. "Thomas told me." "I did," Grace admitted. "And they liked it?" Martha asked, eyebrows raised in surprise. "They seem to." Martha shook her head. "Be careful, child. When they start seeing you as special, it can be dangerous." Grace knew Martha was right. Drawing attention to yourself was risky. Better to remain invisible. And yet, she couldn't forget the look on Mr. Thorne's face when she sang, or Micah's words in the garden. The morning passed in a blur of chores. Grace was sweeping the front porch when a carriage arrived. A man she didn't recognize stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit. He was greeted by Mr. Thorne himself, which meant he was an important visitor. "Grace," Mr. Thorne called to her, "bring tea to my study for Mr. Bennet and me." "Yes, sir," Grace replied, hurrying inside. As she prepared the tea tray, she could hear raised voices coming from the study. Curiosity got the better of her, and she slowed her movements, straining to hear. "The world is changing, Harold," the visitor was saying. "Even here in the South, the abolitionists are gaining support in Congress." "Politics doesn't concern me," Mr. Thorne replied dismissively. "I run my plantation as I see fit." "It will concern you when they try to take your property," Mr. Bennet argued. "We need to stand together against this northern aggression." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she arranged cups on the tray. They were talking about people like her, as property to be defended. When she knocked on the study door, the conversation abruptly stopped. She entered with her eyes lowered, set down the tray and poured tea for the two men. "Is this one of them?" Mr. Bennet asked, gesturing toward Grace. "Yes, this is Grace," Mr. Thorne replied. "The one I mentioned, the singer." Mr. Bennet studied her with cold eyes. "Doesn't look special to me." "You haven't heard her sing," Mr. Thorne said. "It's quite remarkable." Grace finished pouring the tea and backed toward the door. "Will that be all, sir?" she asked. "Yes, go." Mr. Thorne waved her away. As she closed the door behind her, she heard Mr. Bennet say, "You've gone soft, Harold. A slave who sings pretty songs is still just a slave." Grace hurried away, her chest tight with fear and anger. She had almost reached the kitchen when someone pulled her into an empty sitting room. It was Micah. "Did you hear them?" he asked urgently. "Bennet is a slave trader. He's here to convince my father to sell some of you before the laws change." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "Sell us? But this is our home." "I know," Micah said, his face grim. "I won't let it happen. I've been arguing with my father for months about freeing our slaves, not selling them." "Free us?" Grace could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes," Micah nodded. "It's the right thing to do, and after last night, I think my father might finally be listening." Hope and fear battled in Grace's heart. Freedom was the dream every slave carried, but it seemed impossible. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I need your help," Micah explained. "Your song touched something in my father. If you could speak to him, help him see—" "Speak to him?" Grace interrupted, shocked. "I can't do that, I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Micah said firmly. "You're Grace, and your voice has power." Before she could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Micah quickly stepped away from her. "Think about it," he whispered, then left the room through another door. Grace stood alone, her mind reeling, the possibility of freedom mixed with the fear of speaking directly to Mr. Thorne. Could her song really have affected him that deeply? And what would happen if she dared to use her voice not just to sing, but to speak for herself and the others? Later that afternoon, as Grace was hanging laundry in the backyard, she saw Mr. Thorne walking alone, say through the garden. It was unusual for him to be outside at this hour, and he seemed deep in thought. Taking a deep breath, Grace made a decision that could change everything. She approached him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice small but steady, "may I speak with you, sir?" Mr. Thorne looked startled, then frowned. "What is it?" Now that she had his attention, Grace almost lost her courage. But the memory of her mother's songs, of the strength they had given her, pushed her forward. "I heard that Mr. Bennett wants you to sell some of us," she said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. Mr. Thorne's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "You were eavesdropping?" "No, sir," Grace lied, her gaze dropping to the ground. "The servants are talking. We're afraid." Mr. Thorne was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. "My son thinks I should free you all," he said. "He has strange ideas about equality." Grace dared to look up at him. "And what do you think, sir?" Their eyes met, and for the first time Grace didn't look away. She saw confusion in his face, conflict. "I think," he said slowly, "that the world is changing, whether I like it or not." "Last night," Grace said carefully, "the song I sang. It was about freedom, about finding your way home by following the stars." Mr. Thorne looked up at the sky, though the stars weren't visible in the daylight. "It made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time," he admitted. "I don't know what to do with that feeling." "How you could listen to your son," Grace suggested, hardly believing her own boldness. Mr. Thorne's expression hardened again. "You overstep, girl." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir." Grace backed away, cursing herself for pushing Nung too far. "Wait," Mr. Thorne called after her. "Be in my study tomorrow morning, early before breakfast." "Yes, sir," Grace replied, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Had she just made a terrible mistake? That evening, as Grace helped serve dinner to the Thorne family, she could feel Micah watching her. When she brought a pitcher of water to the table, he whispered, "Did you speak to him?" She gave a small nod and saw hope flare in his eyes. After dinner, Grace found Micah waiting for her outside the kitchen. "What happened?" he asked eagerly. "He wants me in his study tomorrow morning," she replied, her voice tight with worry. "I don't know if that's good or bad." "It's good," Micah assured her. "It means he's listening." "What did you say to him?" Grace told him about their brief conversation in the garden. "I shouldn't have mentioned your ideas about freeing us," she said. "He didn't like that." "But he's thinking about it," Micah insisted. "I can tell. He's been different since your song." They stood close together in the shadows, the warm evening air filled with the scent of magnolias. Grace was acutely aware of how improper this conversation was, how dangerous, and yet she couldn't bring herself to end it. "Why do you care so much?" she asked suddenly. "About us, about freedom." Micah's expression grew serious. "Because it's right," he said simply, "and because—" He hesitated, then continued, "Because I see you, Grace, not as a slave but as a woman with a voice that can change hearts." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them could safely acknowledge. "I should go," Grace said, taking a step back. "Tomorrow will change everything," Micah promised. "Be brave." Grace barely slept that night. Her conversation with Mr. Thorne played over and over in her mind, along with Micah's words. A woman with a voice that can change hearts. Could her voice really make a difference? Could it help bring freedom not just for her but for all the slaves at Darlington Hall? Morning came too quickly. Grace dressed carefully in her cleanest dress, her hands aching as she braided her hair. Whatever happened in Mr. Thorne's study today would change her life for better or worse. The house was quiet as she made her way to the study. She knocked softly on the door. "Enter," came Mr. Thorne's voice from inside. Grace opened the door to find not just Mr. Thorne but Micah as well. They sat on opposite sides of the large desk, both looking solemn. "Close the door, Grace," Mr. Thorne instructed. She did as she was to Wilde, then stood with her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "My son and I have been discussing the future of Darlington Hall," Mr. Thorne began. "And your future specifically." Grace's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Last night when you sang, something changed in this house," Mr. Thorne continued. "I can't explain it, but I felt it. We all did." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "This is a document of manumission," he said. "Do you know what that means?" Grace's breath caught in her throat. "It means freedom, sir," she whispered. "Yes, freedom." Mr. Thorne stared at the paper, his expression unreadable. "After what you did, I had a choice, to silence you or to set you free." He held out the paper. "Here's your freedom," he said. Grace's hand trembled as she reached for the document. Was this really happening? Could it be this easy? "Not just her freedom," Micah suddenly spoke up, rising from his chair. "Her future. I want her name beside mine." Grace froze, the paper halfway to her hand. Had she heard correctly? Was Micah Thorne suggesting? Mr. Thorne looked as shocked as she felt. "Micah, you can't possibly—" "I can, Father," Micah interrupted. "I love her. I have for years." Love? Grace's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. It was too much, too fast. "This is madness," Mr. Thorne said, his voice rising. "You're talking about marriage to a woman," Micah finished firmly. "A woman I respect and admire. A woman whose voice can move people to tears." From the doorway came gasps. Grace turned to see several house servants standing there, eyes wide with shock. News would spread like wildfire now. The master's son wanted to marry a slave. Grace looked at the freedom paper in Mr. Thorne's outstretched hand, then at Micah's hopeful face, and finally at Mr. Thorne's conflicted expression. Her whole life she had been told what to do, where to go, who to be. For the first time she had a choice. "I have my freedom," she said, her voice steady as she took the paper from Mr. Thorne. "Let me decide what I do with it." Silence filled Mr. Thorne's study. Grace stood tall, the freedom paper clutched in her hand, her words still hanging in the air. "I have my freedom. Let me decide what I do with it." Mr. Thorne's face reddened. "This is outrageous," he sputtered, glaring at his son. "Micah, you've gone too far. I agreed to free the girl, not to have her join our family." "Father, please," Micah began, but Mr. Thorne cut him off with a wave of his hand. "No, this discussion is over." He turned to Grace. "You have your papers. You're free. You can stay on as a paid servant or you can leave Darlington Hall. Those are your choices." Grace looked down at the document in her hands. After years of dreaming about freedom, it felt strange to finally hold it, but Micah's unexpected declaration had thrown her into confusion. "I'll stay," she said quietly, "as a servant. For now." Mr. Thorne nodded curtly. "Very well. Return to your duties. Micah and I need to talk privately." Grace curtsied out of habit, then caught herself. She wasn't a slave anymore. Still, she left quickly, clutching her freedom paper tightly. In the hallway, the servants who had been listening scattered like startled birds. Only Martha remained, her wise old eyes filled with concern. "Child, what have you done?" she whispered, pulling Grace into an empty room. "I don't know," Grace admitted, showing Martha the manumission paper. "But I'm free, Martha, free." Martha shook her head. "And the young master? What was that about wanting your name beside his?" Grace's cheeks flushed. "He said he loves me, that he wants to marry me." "Lord have mercy," Martha sighed. "That boy's going to get you both killed. White men don't marry colored women, Grace, not in Georgia, not anywhere in the South." "I know," Grace said. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't encourage him." "It doesn't matter," Martha warned. "What matters is what people will think. And Mr. Bennett is still here watching everything." Grace's stomach tightened at the mention of the slave trader. "Do you think Mr. Thorne would let him take any of us now?" "I don't know," Martha admitted. "But be careful, you're walking a dangerous path." Back in the study, Micah faced his father's fury. "Have you lost your mind?" Harold Thorne demanded, pacing the room. "Marriage to a slave?" "Former slave," Micah corrected. "And yes, father, I love her." "Love?" Mr. Thorne scoffed. "You don't even know her." "I've watched her for years," Micah insisted. "I know her kindness, her strength, her dignity, despite everything she's endured." "And what about your position in society? Your future? Have you thought about that?" Micah stood firm. "Some things are more important than society's rules." Mr. Thorne slammed his fist on the desk. "This isn't just about rules, it's about our way of life. What do you think would happen if every plantation owner's son decided to marry a slave? The whole system would collapse." "Maybe it's Shu Eld," Micah said quietly. His father stared at him in disbelief. I didn't raise you to be a radical. You raised me to be a man of principle, Micah countered, and my principles tell me that what we're doing is wrong. Mr. Thorne sank into his chair, suddenly looking tired and old. Bennett is still here, he said. Do you know what he'd do if he heard you talking like this? Do you know what the neighbors would do? Fear flickered across Micah's face, but he pushed it aside. I won't live in fear, Father, and I won't give up on Grace. Give her time, Mr. Thorne advised, his voice softening slightly. She's just been freed. Let her adjust to that before you start talking about marriage. Micah nodded reluctantly. I'll wait, but I won't change my mind. As Micah left the study, he nearly collided with Mr. Bennett in the hallway. The slave trader's cold eyes narrowed suspiciously. Everything all right, young Mr. Thorne? Bennett asked. I heard raised voices. Just a family discussion, Micah replied stiffly. Nothing that concerns you. Bennett smiled, but there was no warmth in it. In these changing times, everything concerns me, especially when it involves the treatment of property. We don't have any property for you to be concerned about, Micah said pointedly, then walked away before Bennett could respond. Bennett watched him go, a calculating look in his eyes. The next few days at Darlington Hall were tense. Grace continued her duties as a servant, but everything felt different. Some of the other house slaves, now technically free servants as well thanks to Mr. Thorne's surprising decision to free them all, treated her with a mixture of respect and resentment. They saw her as the cause of this sudden change, for better or worse. Micah kept his distance as his father had advised, but Grace often caught him watching her with longing in his eyes. She tried to focus on her work, on adjusting to her new status, but her mind kept returning to his declaration. Could he really love her? And what did she feel for him? One evening, as Grace was serving dinner to the Thorne family and their guest, Mr. Bennett, the conversation turned to politics. The North grows more radical by the day, Bennett was saying. There's talk of abolitionists in Congress pushing for laws that would undermine the very foundation of our society. Surely it won't come to that, Mrs. Thorne said nervously. It already has in some places, Bennett replied grimly, which is why smart plantation owners are selling while prices are still high. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. Actually, Bennett, I've decided not to sell any of my people. In fact, I've freed them. Bennett's fork clattered to his plate. You've what? Freed them, Mr. Thorne repeated. They're now paid servants at Darlington Hall. Bennett stared at him in disbelief, then at Grace, who was standing nearby. Is this because of that girl? The one who sang? Grace froze, feeling all eyes turn to her. My decision was based on many factors, Mr. Thorne said carefully. Grace's performance simply highlighted certain truths I had been avoiding. Bennett pushed back from the table. You're making a grave mistake, Harold. The other planters hear about this. Let them hear, Mr. Thorne interrupted. I've made my choice. Bennett shook his head. I thought we were friends, Harold. I thought you were a sensible man. I am sensible, Mr. Thorne insisted. I'm also capable of change. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Grace continued serving, her hands trembling slightly. After dinner, Bennett pulled Grace aside in the hallway. You think you've W on something, don't you? He hissed. Got yourself free, turned the master's head, maybe even caught his son's eye. Grace tried to step around him. Excuse me, sir, I need to clear the dishes. Bennett grabbed her arm. Listen to me, girl. This won't last. They'll never accept you as anything but a slave. And if you try to rise above your station, there will be consequences. Is there a problem here? Micah's voice came from behind them. Bennett released Grace's arm immediately. No problem at all. Just having a friendly chat with your servant. Grace, are you all right? Micah asked, ignoring Bennett. Yes, Mr. Micah, she answered, rubbing her arm where Bennett had gripped it. Then please continue with your duties, Micah said gently. I'd like to speak with Mr. Bennett alone. Grace hurried away, but not before hearing Micah say in a low, dangerous voice, If you ever touch her again. Later the tea night, unable to sleep, Grace slipped out to the garden. The air was cooler now and the stars seemed especially bright. She unfolded her freedom paper, reading it again in the moonlight, still hardly able to believe it was real. Couldn't sleep either? She turned to find Micah approaching. She should go back inside. It wasn't proper for her to be alone with him, especially at night, but she couldn't make herself move. "No, sir," she replied. "Too much hayes happened." "You don't have to call me sir anymore, Grace," Micah reminded her gently. "You're free now." "Old habits," she said with a small smile. "It's hard to remember sometimes." Micah came closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I want to apologize for putting you in an awkward position. I shouldn't have declared my feelings so suddenly." "Why did you?" Grace asked, genuinely curious. "Because I couldn't keep them inside any longer," Micah admitted. "When I saw you standing there about to be free, I wanted you to know that you had choices, real choices." "Marriage to you isn't a real choice," Grace said softly. "You know that." Micah's face fell. "Because you don't share my feelings?" "Because the world wouldn't allow it," Grace clarified. "Your father would disown you. Society would shun you. It could even be dangerous." "I don't care about any of that," Micah insisted. "But I do, my Jimara," Ace said. "I care about you, Micah. I won't be the reason you lose everything." Micah took another step toward her. "What if you're the reason I gain everything that truly matters?" Before Grace could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. It was Thomas, the butler. "Miss Grace," he called out, pointedly emphasizing her new title. "Mrs. Thorne is asking for you." "At this hour?" Grace asked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. She says it's urgent." Grace folded a freedom paper and tucked it into her pocket. "I have to go," she said to Micah. "We'll talk again," he promised, just as he had the night of the party. Grace found Mrs. Thorne in her bedroom, already dressed for bed, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Grace asked. Mrs. Thorne studied her for a long moment. "Sit down, Grace," she said, gesturing to a chair. Grace sat, feeling uncomfortable under the woman's scrutiny. "My husband has lost his mind," Mrs. Thorne said bluntly. "First freeing all our slaves, and now letting my stepson make a fool of himself over you." Grace opened her mouth to protest, but Mrs. Thorne held up a hand. "Don't bother denying it. Everyone knows. The servants talk, and Mr. Bennett has been quite vocal about his concerns." "I never encouraged Mr. Micah," Grace said defensively. "It doesn't matter," Mrs. Thorne said, echoing Martha's words from earlier. "What matters is how it looks." She rose and walked to her dressing table, picking up a small purse. "There's $50 in here," she said, holding it out to Grace. "Take it and leave Darlington Hall tonight." Grace stared at the purse in shock. "Leave? It's for the best," Mrs. Thorne insisted. "You have your freedom. Take this money and start a new life somewhere else, somewhere far from here." "But the others," Grace protested. "Martha, Thomas, everyone who was freed, they can stay if they wish. It's only you who needs to go." Grace felt anger rising in her chest. "Because of Micah." "Yes," Mrs. Thorne admitted. "My husband may be willing to ruin our family's reputation, but I am not. Micah will forget you once you're gone. He'll marry someone suitable and life will return to normal." "And if I refuse to go?" Grace asked, lifting her chin. Mrs. Thorne's expression hardened. "Then I can't be responsible for what might happen. Mr. Bennett has friends who wouldn't take kindly to a former slave getting ideas above her station." The threat was clear. Grace stood, ignoring the offered money. "I have worked for your family my entire life," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have done everything that was asked of me without complaint. And now that I'm free, you want me to run away in the night like a thief? I want you now to do what's best for everyone," Mrs. Thorne said coldly, "including yourself." Grace turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I will think about what you've said, ma'am. But if I go, it will be on my own terms, in the light of day, with my head held high." She left Mrs. Thorne's room, her mind in turmoil. Should she leave? Perhaps it would be best for everyone. She could start a new life somewhere else, somewhere she could truly be free. But the doubt of leaving Martha and the others, of never seeing Micah again. As she walked back to her quarters, Grace heard raised voices coming from Mr. Thorne's study. She recognized Micah's voice, then Bennett's, then Mr. Thorne's. They were arguing, and from the sound of it, the argument was about her. "This has gone far enough," Bennett was saying. The girl needs to be dealt with before she causes any more trouble. She hasn't caused any trouble, Micah defended. She's simply existing as a free woman, which is her right. Her right? Bennett scoffed. She has no rights. None of them do, papers or no papers. That's enough, Bennett, Mr. Thorne said firmly. Grace is under my protection now, as are all my former slaves. Your protection won't mean much when word gets out about your son's intentions, Bennett warned. Do you think the other plantation owners will stand for it? Do you think your neighbor Juarez will allow a Negro to become mistress of Darlington Hall? There was a loud crash, as if someone had struck a table. Get out of my house, Micah demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Micah, calm down, Mr. Thorne said. Bennett, I think it's best if you leave in the morning. It's clear we no longer see eye to eye on these matters. You're making a grave mistake, Harold, Bennett said, his voice dangerous. Both of you. Grace backed away from the Dior, her heart pounding. Bennett was angry, and angry men were dangerous men. She needed to warn Micah, to tell him to be careful. She waited in the shadows until Bennett stormed out of the study, then slipped inside before the door could close. Grace, Micah said in surprise, what are you doing here? I heard everything, she admitted. Bennett is dangerous. You need to be careful. Mr. Thorne sighed heavily. She's right, Micah. Bennett has influence, with people who wouldn't hesitate to cause trouble. I'm not afraid of him, Micah insisted. You should be, Grace said, and so should I. Your stepmother just tried to pay me to leave Darlington Hall. What? Micah looked shocked. She offered me $50 to disappear tonight, Grace explained. She said it would be better for everyone if I just went away. That's ridiculous, Micah said angrily. Father, did you know about this? Mr. Thorne shook his head. No, but I'm not surprised. Catherine has always been concerned with appearances. And what about you? Micah challenged. Are you also concerned with appearances? Do you also want Grace to leave? Mr. Thorne looked at Grace thoughtfully. A week ago I would have said yes, but now... He shook his head. That song changed something in me. I can't explain it, but it made me see things differently, made me see her differently. So she can stay? Micah asked hopefully. She can stay, Mr. Thorne confirmed. But Micah, this talk of marriage, it's too much too soon for all of us. Grace felt relief wash over her. She wouldn't have to leave her home, her friends. Not yet, anyway. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, she said sincerely. Mr. Thorne nodded. Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. As Grace left the study, Micah followed her into the hallway. Grace, wait, he called softly. She turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how alone they were in the dim corridor. I won't let them drive you away, he promised. Not Bennett, not my stepmother, not anyone. Micah, she said gently, your father is right. This is too much, too soon. I'm still adjusting to being free. I don't know what I want yet. But you'll give me a chance, he asked, his eyes full of hope. To show you how I feel? To let you decide if you could ever feel the same. Grachi hesitated. The sensible thing would be to discourage him completely, to make it clear that there could never be anything between them. But looking into his earnest face, she couldn't bring herself to say the words. I need time, she said instead. Can you give me that? Micah nodded, relief flooding his features. All the time you need. Just promise you won't leave without saying goodbye. I promise, Grace said and meant it. The next morning, Grace woke early as usual. As she dressed, she touched the freedom paper in her pocket, reassuring herself that it was still there, still real. Then she headed to the kitchen to help with breakfast. Martha was already there, kneading dough for biscuits. You look tired, child, she observed. I am tired, Grace admitted. Too much happened last night. She told Martha about Mrs. Thorne's bribe, the argument with Bennett, and her conversation with Micah and Mr. T. Horn. Martha shook her head worriedly. This is getting dangerous, Grace. Bennett isn't a man who likes to lose. I know, Grace sighed, but Mr. Thorne said I can stay. For now, Martha cautioned, but things change. People change. As they prepared breakfast, Thomas burst into the kitchen, his face pale. Bennett's gone, he announced. Gone? Grace asked. What do you mean? His room is empty. His bags are gone. He must have left during the night. Martha and Grace exchanged concerned looks. Bennett leaving without saying goodbye was odd, and potentially worrying. "Should we tell Mr. Thorne?" Grace asked. "Tell me what?" Mr. Thorne himself appeared in the kitchen doorway, an unusual occurrence that made the servants straighten in surprise. Thomas quickly explained about Bennett's disappearance. Mr. Thorne frowned. "That's strange. He said he would leave in the morning, but I expected him to say goodbye at least." "Maybe he was too angry," Grace suggested. "Perhaps," Mr. Thorne agreed, but he looked troubled. "Grace, when you've finished your duties here, please come to my study. We need to discuss your new position." "New position?" Grace repeated, confused. "Yes, now that you're free, we need to agree on your wages and responsibilities." He glanced around the kitchen. "That goes for all of you. I'll be meeting with each of you today." After he left, the kitchen buzzed with excited whispers. Wages. It was something none of them had ever had before. "Don't get too excited," Martha warned. "Freedom comes with its own challenges. We still need to eat, to have a roof over our heads. And now we'll be paying for those things." "But we'll be paid for our work," Grace pointed out. "That's something." "It is something," Martha agreed. "I just hope it's enough." After breakfast was served and cleared, Grace made her way to Mr. Thorne's study, as instructed. She knocked on the door, and when he called for her to enter, she found him sitting behind his desk with a ledger open before him. "Ah, Grace," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been reviewing the household accounts, trying to determine fair wages for everyone." Grace sat, still finding it strange to be invited to sit in the master's presence. "Thank you for doing this, sir," she said. Mr. Thorne looked up from his ledger. "I want to be clear about something, Grace. I didn't free you and the others out of charity or even kindness. I did it because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because your song made me see that I've been wrong, that the whole system is wrong." Grace was stunned by his admission. "I never thought I would hear you say that, sir." "Neither did I," he said with a rueful smile. "But here we are." He named a monthly wage that seemed generous to Grace, who had never had money of her own before. He also explained that room and board would be provided, with a small deduction from her wages. "Is that acceptable?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Grace replied, still somewhat overwhelmed. "More than acceptable." "Good." Mr. Thorne closed his ledger. "Now about your duties. I was thinking you might take on a new role." "A new role?" Grace asked, curious. "Yes. Mrs. Thorne is planning another dinner party next week. Guests have been asking if the singing slave, forgive the term, will perform again." He smiled slightly. "I thought you might like to be officially designated as Darlington Hall's entertainment coordinator and performer." Grace's eyes widened. "You want me to sing for your guests, regularly?" "If you're willing," Mr. Thorne said. "You have a remarkable gift, Grace. It would be a shame not to share it." Grace's mind raced. To be paid to sing instead of to serve, it was beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself. "I would be honored, sir," she said sincerely. "Excellent. You'll still have some household duties, but fewer than before. You'll have time to practice your music." As Grace left the study, her head spinning with all these changes, she nearly collided with Micah in the hallway. "Sorry," she gasped, stepping back. "No need to apologize," he said with a smile. "How did your meet-in-G with my father go?" "Wonderfully," Grace admitted. "He's made me the entertainment coordinator for Darlington Hall. I'm going to sing at your stepmother's dinner party next week." Micah's face lit up. "That's fantastic. See, everything is working out." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Grace found herself smiling back. "It does seem that way." "Have dinner with me tonight," Micah said suddenly. "Not as a servant, but as my guest." Grace's smile faded. "Micah, I don't think that's a good idea. Your stepmother already wants me gone. If I start dining with the family—" "Not with the family," Micah clarified. "Just with me. In the gazebo in the garden. No one needs to know." Grace hesitated. The idea was tempting, but also frightening. Being alone with Micah, sharing a meal as equals, it crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Please," Micah pressed, "just dinner, just talk." Against her better Jew. "Damned," Grace nodded. "All right, but we must be careful." "We will be," Micah promised, his eyes shining with happiness. "Meet me at the gazebo at 8. I'll bring everything we need." As Grace walked away, she wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. But a part of her, a part that had been silent for too long, was singing with joy at the thought of the evening ahead. The day passed in a blur of duties and preparations for Mrs. Thorne's upcoming dinner party. Grace found herself humming as she worked, earning curious glances from the other servants. Word had spread about her new position, and reactions were mixed. Some were happy for her, others resentful. "Entertainment coordinator," Thomas scoffed when he thought she couldn't hear. "Just because she can carry a tune." "It's not right," agreed one of the kitchen maids. "She's no better than the rest of us." Grace tried to ignore the comments, but they stung. She hadn't asked for this special treatment. She hadn't asked for any of this. By evening, Grace was both nervous and excited about her dinner with Micah. She changed into her best dress, still simple but clean and well-mended, and let her hair down from its usual tight bun. Looking in the small mirror in her room, she hardly recognized herself. Was this what freedom looked like? At 8 o'clock, she slipped out to the garden, careful to avoid being seen. The night was warm, with fireflies blinking like tiny stars among the flower beds. The gazebo stood at the far end of the garden, surrounded by climbing roses. As she approached, she saw it was lit with several small lanterns, casting a golden glow over the scene. Micah was waiting, a table set for two with the fine china and silver usually reserved for important guests. He stood when he saw her, his face breaking into a smile. "You came," he said, as if he had doubted she would. "I said I would," Grace replied, suddenly shy. "You look beautiful," Micah said simply. Grace felt her cheeks warm. No one had ever called her beautiful before. "Thank you," she murmured. Micah held out a chair for her, and Grace sat, feeling like she was in a dream. He had brought cold chicken, fresh bread, fruit, and even a bottle of wine. "I didn't know what you liked," he admitted as he served her. "I've watched Yayo serve meals for years, but I never knew what you enjoyed eating." "This is wonderful," Grace assured him, looking at the food with appreciation. "More than I'm used to, certainly." They ate and talked, at first awkwardly, then with growing ease. Micah told her about his education in the North, where he had first encountered abolitionist ideas. "My professors thought differently than people here," he explained. "They believed in equality and freedom for all. At first I argued against them. I defended my father's way of life, our way of life. But over time I began to see the truth in their words." "And now you want to marry a former slave," Grace said, still finding the idea incredible. Micah reached across the table to take her hand. "I want to marry you, Grace, not because of what you were, but because of who you are." Grace looked at their hands, his pale, hers dark, joined on the white tablecloth. It was a beautiful image, but also a dangerous one. "Micah," she began, not sure what she was going to say. But before she could continue, they heard shouts from the direction of the house, loud, angry voices, and what sounded like breaking glass. Micah stood quickly. "Stay here," he instructed, but Grace was already on her feet. "No, I'm coming with you," she insisted. They hurried toward the house, the sounds of commotion growing louder. As they reached the back porch, they saw a group of men, some holding torches, confronting Mr. Thorne on his own doorstep. "Harold Thorne, you have betrayed your kind," one of the men was saying, his voice slurred with drink. "Freeing your slaves, letting them get above themselves." "Get off my property," Mr. Thorne demanded. "All of you." "Not until we've taught you and your uppity niggers a lesson," another man shouted. Grace gasped as she recognized Bennett among the group, his face twisted with malice in the torchlight. "I told you there would be consequences, Harold," Bennett called out. "Now you'll see what happens to race traitors." Micah stepped forward, putting himself between Grace and the mob. "Father, get inside," he urged. "We need to get help." But it was too late. The men surged forward, pushing past Mr. Thorne into the house. Grace could hear screams from inside, Martha, Thomas, the other servants. "Run, Grace," Micah urged, pushing her toward the darkness of the garden. "Hide. I'll find you when it's safe." "I can't leave you," Grace protested. "You have to," Micah insisted. "They're here for you as much as for us. Please, Grace, run." With a last desperate look at the man she now realized she loved, Grace turned and ran into the night, the sounds of violence fading behind her as darkness swallowed her whole. Grace ran through the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her she could hear shouts and the orange glow of torches lighting up the night sky. Darlington Hall, the only home she had ever known, was under attack because of her. She made it to the edge of the property, where a small creek ran through a stand of willow trees. There, hidden by the drooping branches, she stopped to catch her breath and try to think. Should she keep running? Where would she go? Or should she try to find help? The sound of approaching footsteps made her press herself against the trunk of a willow tree, hardly daring to breathe. "Grace," a voice whispered. "Grace, are you out here?" It was Martha. Grace stepped out from behind the tree. "Martha, what's happening? Are you all right?" The older woman hurried to her side. "It's chaos up at the house. Bennett and his men are tearing the place apart looking for you." "For me?" Grace felt sick with guilt. "This is all my fault." "No, child," Martha said firmly. "This is Bennett's doing. He's been planning this since he found out about you and young Mr. Micah." "Is Micah all right? And Mr. Thorne?" Martha nodded. "For now, they're trying to reason with the mob, but those men have been drinking. They're not in a reasonable mood." Grace made a decision. "I have to go back. If they want me, they can have me. I won't let anyone else get hurt because of me." Martha grabbed her arm. "That's exactly what Bennett wants. He's not just after you, Grace. He wants to make an example of all of us, to show what happens when slaves get their freedom." "Then what should we do?" Grace asked desperately. "Grace, there's a patrol of federal soldiers camped about 3 miles down the road," Martha explained. "Thomas went to get them as soon as the trouble started. We need to stay hidden until they arrive." "But what if they hurt Micah before then, or Mr. Thorne?" "They won't," Martha assured her. "Bennett's not foolish enough to harm white men, especially not a wealthy plantation owner like Mr. Thorne. It's us they're after." Grace wasn't convinced, but she knew Martha was right about one thing. Rushing back to the house would only play into Bennett's hands. "Where are the others?" she asked. "Scattered," Martha replied. "We all ran in different directions when they broke in. Thomas went for help. I came looking for you." A loud crash from the direction of the house made them both jump. The shouting had grown louder, and now they could see more torches moving across the grounds. "They're searching the property," Martha whispered. "We need to move deeper into the woods." They crept along the creek, keeping to the shadows, heading away from Darlington Hall. The night was warm, but Grace shivered with fear and guilt. If she had left when Mrs. Thorne offered her the money, none of this would be happening. "It's not your fault," Martha said, as if reading her thoughts. "You have as much right to be here as any of them. But Micah—" Grace couldn't finish the sentence. Martha sighed. "I've known that boy since he was born. He's got a good heart, but sometimes I think he doesn't understand the world we live in." "He understands," Grace defended him. "He just believes it can be different." "And do you believe that too?" Martha asked. Grace thought about it. A week ago, she wouldn't have dared to dream of freedom, let alone anything more, but now— "I don't know," she admitted, "but I hope so." They found a small clearing deep in the woods and sat down to wait, listening for any signs of pursuit. The sounds from the house had faded, but Grace couldn't relax. Her mind kept going back to Micah, to the moment when he had urged her to run. The fear in his eyes had been for her, not for himself. "I think I love him, Martha," she whispered. Martha took her hand. "Oh, child, I was afraid of that." "Is it wrong?" Grace asked. "Love is never wrong," Martha said gently, "but sometimes it's impossible." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in her own thoughts. Then they heard it, the sound of horses approaching, many of them, moving fast. "That must be the soldiers," Martha said, standing up. "We should go meet them." "Wait," Grace cautioned. "What if it's Bennett and his men?" They crouched down again, waiting anxiously as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then veered away toward Darlington Hall. "Let's follow them," Grace suggested, carefully. "We need to see what's happening." Martha nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we stay in the trees, no heroics." They made their way back toward the house, keeping to the edge of the woods. As they drew closer, they could see that the grounds of Darlington Hall were now lit up with more torches and lanterns. Men in uniform, the federal soldiers, were dismounting from their horses. They made it, Martha breathed in relief. Thomas got the help. From their hiding place, they watched as the soldiers surrounded Bennett and his group of men who had been caught in the act of ransacking the house. Mr. Thorne stood on the porch, his face bruised but his posture unbowed. Next to him was Micah, a cut on his forehead, but otherwise appearing unharmed. "We need to go to them," Grace said, starting forward. Martha held her back. "Wait. Let's be sure it's safe first." They watched as Bennett and his men were disarmed and lined up in front of the house. The captain of the soldiers appeared to be questioning Mr. Thorne, who pointed repeatedly at Bennett, his expression furious. "I think it's safe now," Martha decided. "The soldiers are in control." They emerged from the woods and crossed the lawn toward the house. When Micah spotted Grace, his face lit up with relief. He rushed down the steps to meet her. "Grace, thank God you're all right," he exclaimed, reaching for her hands. "I was so worried." "I'm fine," she assured him. "Martha found me. What happened here? Are you hurt?" Micah touched the cut on his forehead. "It's nothing. One of Bennett's men hit me with a bottle. But Father stood his ground. He told them he'd see them all hanged if they didn't leave his property." "And then Thomas arrived with the soldiers," Martha added. "Yes," Micah nodded. "Just in time. They were starting to get really ugly." The captain of the soldiers approached them. "Is this the woman Bennett was looking for?" he asked Micah. "Yes, Captain. This is Grace," Micah confirmed. "She's a free woman employed by my father." The captain looked Grace over, his expression neutral. "Bennett claims she's a runaway slave, says he has papers proving she belongs to a plantation in South Carolina." "That's a lie," Grace exclaimed. "I was born here at Darlington Hall. I've never been to South Carolina in my life." "She has her freedom papers," Micah added, "signed by my father just days ago." The captain nodded. "I'll need to see those papers, and I'll need statements from all of you about what happened here tonight." Mr. Thorne joined them, his face grim but determined. "You'll have everything you need, Captain. Bennett and his men broke into my home, threatened my family, and assaulted my employees. I want them charged with every crime possible. We'll take them into custody," the captain assured him. "But there will need to be an investigation. They are unusual circumstances." Grace understood what he meant. A white plantation owner freeing his slaves and then defending them against other white men was not something that happened every day in Georgia. "Let's go inside," Mr. Thorne suggested. "The house is a mess, but we can at least sit down and sort this out." The captain agreed, and they all moved into the damaged drawing room. Furniture had been overturned, glasses broken, and one of the curtains partially burned from a torch. It was in this very room that Grace had sung her song just days ago, changing everything. While Mr. Thorne spoke with the captain, Micah pulled Grace aside to a quiet corner. "I was so afraid for you," he said softly. "When I saw Bennett and his men coming, all I could think was that I had to get you away safely." "I was afraid for you too," Grace admitted. "I almost came back to the house." "I'm glad you didn't," Micah said, reaching out to touch her cheek gently. "If anything had happened to you," Grace caught his hand in hers. "I'm all right. We're all right." Micah looked around at the damaged room, at Bennett and his men being guarded by soldiers outside. "This isn't over, Grace. Bennett has friends, powerful friends." "I know," she sighed. "Maybe I should leave after all. Go north where it's safer." "No," Micah said firmly. "I won't let them drive you away. That is your home." Before Grace could respond, the captain called her over to take her statement. She showed him her freedom papers, which he examined carefully before handing them back. "These appear to be in order," he said, "but Bennett's accusation will still need to be investigated. And there's the matter of, well, the rumors about you and Mr. Thorne's son." Grace felt her face flush. "What rumors, sir?" The captain looked uncomfortable. "Bennett claims that you've bewitched the young Mr. Thorne, that the two of you have been engaging in inappropriate relations." "That's not true," Grace protested, then hesitated. "I mean, we've talked, but nothing improper has happened." "I see," the captain said, not looking entirely convinced. "Well, that's not my concern, strictly speaking. My job is to maintain order and enforce the law, and breaking into someone's home and assaulting the occupants is clear. Lie against the law regardless of the social complications. After taking statements from everyone, the captain and his men prepared to leave, taking Bennett and his accomplices with them. "They'll be held in town until a judge can hear the case," the captain explained to Mr. Thorne. "I'd advise you all to be careful in the meantime. This kind of situation can inflame tensions." "We'll be vigilant," Mr. Thorne assured him. "And I appreciate your assistance tonight, Captain." Once the soldiers had gone, the true extent of the damage became clear. The drawing room and dining room had been ransacked, with broken furniture and shattered china everywhere. The kitchen had fared better, but food stores had been dumped out and trampled. "They were like animals," Mrs. Thorne said, surveying the destruction with tears in her eyes. "All of this because of—" She stopped herself, glancing at Grace. "You can say it, Catherine," Mr. Thorne said wearily. "All of this because I freed my slaves, because I dared to treat them as human beings." "It wasn't just that," Mrs. Thorne argued. "It was the girl. The way Micah looks at her, the way you've elevated her above her station." "People are talking, Harold." "Let them talk," Mr. Thorne replied. "I'm tired of living my life according to what others think is proper." Mrs. Thorne looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "This isn't just about propriety. This is about our safety, our position in society. Look what happened tonight. What do you think will happen next if you continue down this path?" "I don't know," Mr. Thorne admitted. "But I know I can't go back to the way things were. Not after what I've seen, not after what I've felt." He looked at Grace, and she understood that he was talking about her song, about the way it had broken through his defenses and made him feel something he couldn't ignore. "We should all get some rest," Micah suggested. "We can clean up in the morning." They all agreed, too exhausted to do more tonight. The house was secure again, with Thomas and several of the other male servants standing watch in case of further trouble. Grace returned to her quarters, which had been largely untouched during the attack. Martha was waiting for her. "Quite a night," the older woman said, helping Grace undress. "Yes," Grace agreed, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. "Martha, do you think Bennett will come back?" "Not tonight," Martha assured her, "but eventually. Yes, I think he or men like him will try again. Men like that don't give up easily." "Then maybe I should leave," Grace said, "before anyone else gets hurt." Martha sat down beside her on the narrow bed. "Is that what you want? To leave?" Grace thought about it. "No," she admitted. "I want to stay. I want to see if things really can be different." "Because of Micah?" Martha asked gently. "Partly," Grace nodded, "but also because of me. For the first time in my life, I feel like I might have a future, a real future, not just endless days of serving others." Martha patted her hand. "Then you stay and fight for that future, and I'll be right here beside you." Grace slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with angry mobs and burning torches. She woke early, as was her habit, and went to help with the cleanup. The damage looked even worse in the daylight. Windows had been broken, furniture smashed, and some of the family portraits slashed with knives. The drawing room where she had sung her song was almost unrecognizable. Grace was sweeping up broken glass when Micah found her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Father's hiring men from town to help with the repairs." "I want to help," Grace insisted. "This happened because of me." "No," Micah said firmly. "This happened because of hatred and fear. Because men like Bennett can't accept change." Grace continued sweeping. "Your stepmother blames me." "My stepmother is afraid," Micah said. "She's lived her whole life according to certain rules, and now those rules are changing. It frightens her." "It frightens me too," Grace admitted. "Everything is happening so fast. A week ago I you as a slave, and now you're free," Micah finished for her. "Free to make your own choices, your own future." Grace looked up at him, at his earnest face and kind eyes. "Is that really possible for someone like me?" "I believe it is," Micah said. "I have to believe it." They worked side by side for a while, clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved. Grace was struck by how natural it felt to work alongside Micah, as equals. There was no awkwardness, No sense that he was lowering himself to help her. Just two people working together toward a common goal. By midday, workers from town had arrived to begin repairs. Mr. Thorne was directing them, pointing out what needed to be fixed first. Despite the previous night's attack, he seemed energized, determined. "Father's in his element," Micah observed. "He loves a project to manage." "He seems different," Grace said. "Not just since last night HT, but since I sang." Micah nodded. "He is different. I've never seen him like this before. It's like something inside him has woken up." They watched as Mr. Thorne instructed the workers, his voice firm but not unkind. He thanked them for coming on short notice, promised fair pay, and even joked with some of the men he knew well. "I think your song did more than just move him emotionally," Micah said thoughtfully. "I think it reminded him of who he used to be before he became so hardened by the plantation life." "What was he like before?" Grace asked curiously. "Kinder," Micah replied. "More thoughtful. My mother used to say he had the soul of a poet, hidden under all that practicality. After she died, he seemed to lose that part of himself. Until now." The mention of Micah's mother reminded Grace of something she'd been wondering about. "Your stepmother. She's much younger than your father. Isn't she?" "Yes," Micah confirmed. "They married 5 years ago, when I was away at school. Father was lonely, and Catherine came from a good family, but one that had fallen on hard times. It was a practical arrangement for both of them." "Not a love match," Grace said, understanding. "No," Micah agreed. "Not like—" He trailed off, looking at her intently. Grace felt her heart quicken. "Micah, we shouldn't talk about this here," he finished for her. "I know, but we need to talk, Grace. About last night. About what almost happened at dinner. About everything." "Yes," she agreed. "But not now. There's too much to do." They returned to their work, but Grace could feel Micah's eyes on her throughout the day. The intensity of his gaze both thrilled and frightened her. Was this love? This constant awareness of another person, this feeling that your future was somehow tied to theirs? In the late afternoon, a carriage arrived at Darlington Hall. A distinguished-looking man in a suit stepped out, surveying the damaged property with a concerned expression. "That's Judge Harmon," Micah told Grace. "A friend of my father's from before the war. I wonder what he's doing here." Mr. Thorne greeted the judge warmly, though with obvious surprise. They spoke briefly on the porch, then went inside together. "Should we be worried?" Grace asked. "I don't think so," Micah said. "Judge Harmon is one of the more progressive minds in the county. If Father's confiding in him about what happened, that's probably a good sign." An hour later, Mr. Thorne called everyone together in the partially restored dining room. The house servants, now free employees, gathered nervously, wondering what this meeting was about. "As you all know," Mr. Thorne began, "last night's attack was not just random violence. It was a direct response to my decision to free you all and to employ you as paid workers." Murmurs ran through the group. Mr. Thorne held up his hand for silence. "I want to assure you that I stand by that decision. You are free and you will remain free. You are welcome to continue working here at Darlington Hall for fair wages, or you are free to seek employment elsewhere. The choice is yours." Relief washed over the faces of many in the room. They had feared that after the attack, Char Thorne might reconsider his decision. "However," Mr. Thorne continued, "I must also be realistic about the dangers we now face. Bennett has been arrested, but as we all know, he is not the only one who opposes what we're doing here." Judge Harmon stepped forward. "What happened here last night was criminal and inexcusable," he said in a deep, authoritative voice. "The men responsible will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. However, as your fry end, Harold, I must advise caution going forward." "What kind of caution, Your Honor?" Thomas asked boldly. The judge looked at him, surprised by the direct question from a former slave. "For one thing, it would be wise to be discreet about certain aspects of life at Darlington Hall, particularly regarding," he glanced between Micah and Grace, "social interactions that might be deemed inappropriate by the wider community." Grace felt her face grow hot. So the rumors had reached even the judge's ears. "With all due respect, Judge Harmon," Micah said, stepping forward, I do not believe we should have to hide the truth to appease those who wish to maintain an unjust system. Micah, his father warned. No, father, this needs to be said, Micah insisted. Grace and the others are free people now. They have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. And yes, they have the right to form relations, types of their own choosing. The room fell silent. Micah had just openly acknowledged what everyone had been whispering about, his feelings for Grace. Judge Harmon cleared his throat uncomfortably. Young man, I understand your idealism, but we live in the real world, with real consequences for actions that defy social norms. Then perhaps the norms need to change, Micah argued. Micah, enough, Mr. Thorne said firmly. Judge Harmon is here to help us. He's arranged for additional patrols from the federal soldiers to protect Darlington Hall in the coming weeks. That silenced Micah, though Grace could see he was still seething. Thank you, Judge, Mr. Thorne continued. We appreciate your support during this difficult time. The meeting concluded, and everyone dispersed to continue with their duties. Grace was heading to the kitchen when Micah caught up with her. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, he said quietly, but I couldn't stand there and listen to him talk about discretion and social norms as if our feelings do not matter. Our feelings do matter, Grace agreed, but so does reality, Micah. The judge is right. There are consequences. So what are we supposed to do? Pretend? Hide? Micah asked, frustration evident in his voice. Grace looked around to make sure no one was listening. For now, yes. If we want any chance at a future together, we need to be smart. Patient. Micah's expression softened. A future together? Does that mean? It means I care for you, Grace said carefully. More than I should. More than is wise. But I'm not ready to put a name to it yet. Not with everything else that's happening. Micah nodded, understanding in his eyes. I can be patient, he promised, as long as I know there's hope. Grace squeezed his hand quickly, then continued on her way to the kitchen. Her heart felt lighter somehow, despite all the challenges that lay ahead. She had spoken the truth. She wasn't ready to call it love yet. But whatever it was, it gave her strength. And she would need all the strength she could find in the days to come. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The house was gradually restored, with new windows installed and furniture repaired or replaced. The federal soldiers patrolled regularly, their presence both reassuring her and a reminder of the dangers that still lurked. Mrs. Thorne's dinner party, originally scheduled for that week, was postponed indefinitely. She spent most of her time in her room, emerging only for meals, her expression cold and distant. It was clear she blamed Grace for everything that had happened, but she no longer made any direct attempts to drive her away. Grace focused on her new role as entertainment coordinator, practicing her singing daily and learning new songs from a book of music Micah had given her. She was determined to prove herself worthy of Mr. Thorne's trust, to show that his decision to elevate her position had been justified. One afternoon, as she was practicing in the newly restored drawing room, she was surprised by a visit from Judge Harmon. He stood in the doorway listening as she sang a simple folk melody. That was lovely, he said when she finished. I can see why Harold was so moved by your voice. Thank you, Your Honor, Grace replied, setting aside her music. Can I help you with something? The judge entered the room, looking around at the repairs. I wanted to speak with you privately, Miss Grace, about a matter of some delicacy. Grace felt a knot form in her stomach. Yes, sir. Judge Harmon sat down in one of the newly upholstered chairs, gesturing for Grace to take a seat as well. It was still strange to her, sitting in the presence of white men as if they were equals. I've known the Thorne family for many years, the judge began. Harold and I fought together in the Mexican War. I held Micah as a baby. I've watched him grow into a fine young man with strong convictions. Grace nodded, waiting for him to get to the point. Micah has always been idealistic. Even as a boy, he questioned things that most people took for granted. It's a quality I've always admired in him, even when I disagreed with his conclusions. He is a good man, Grace said simply. Yes, he is, Judge Harmon agreed, but sometimes good men can be reckless, especially when their hearts are involved. Ah, Grace thought. So this was the purpose of the judge's visit. "You're here to warn me away from him," she said, surprising herself with her directness. The judge raised his eyebrows. "I'm here to help you understand the reality of the situation, Miss Grace. Micah may believe that love conquers all, but the world is not so simple." "I know that, sir," Grace assured him. "Better than most, I think." "Then you know that a relationship between you and Micah would face tremendous obstacles, legal obstacles, social obstacles, physical danger." "I do know," Grace said, "and I have not encouraged his feelings." The judge studied her face. "But you return them, don't you?" Grace looked down at her hands. "My feelings are my own, Your Honor. But I would never do anything to harm Micah or his future." "Even if that means letting him go?" the judge pressed. Grace felt a sharp pain in her chest at the thought, but she nodded. "Even then, if I believed it was truly best for him." Judge Harmon seemed satisfied with her answer. "You're a remarkable young woman, Miss Grace. I can see why Micah is drawn to you. In another time, another place. But not here, not now," Grace finished for him. "No," the judge agreed sadly. "Not here and now." He rose to leave, but paused at the door. "Bennett's trial is next week. Harold will testify and you may be called as well. Be prepared for unpleasantness. Bennett has powerful friends and they will not make this easy." "I understand," Grace said. "Thank you for the warning." After the judge left, Grace sat for a long time, staring at the keys of the piano without seeing them. She had known all along that a future with Micah was a dream, not a reality. But hearing it confirmed by someone like Judge Harmon, someone who clearly cared for Micah and was not motivated by hatred or prejudice, made it more final somehow. That evening, as she helped serve dinner, she still had some household duties along with her new role. She found it hard to look at Micah. Every time their eyes met, she felt that same painful tightness in her chest. The thought of letting him go, of walking away from the possibility of love, was almost unbearable. After dinner, Micah found her in the kitchen as she was helping to clean up. "You've been avoiding me all evening," he said quietly. "What's wrong?" "Not here," Grace whispered, nodding toward the other servants who were pretending not to listen. Micah understood. "Meet me in the library in 10 minutes, he suggested. "It should be empty at this hour." Grace hesitated, then nodded. She finished her task's queue quickly, then made her way to the library, a room she had only entered previously to clean. Micah was already there, standing by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. He turned when she entered, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Grace," he said, moving toward her. "I've missed you these past few days. With all the repairs and preparations for Bennett's trial, we've barely had a moment alone." "Judge Harmon came to see me today," Grace said, getting straight to the point. Micah's expression darkened. "What did he want?" "To warn me about the dangers of us," Grace explained. "To remind me that the world isn't ready for what we might want." "And what do we want, Grace?" Micah asked, coming closer. "We've never really said it plainly." Grace took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter what we want. The judge is right, it's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Micah insisted. "Difficult, yes. De-angerous, perhaps. But not impossible." "Micah," Grace said gently, "be realistic. Even if we found a way to be together, what kind of life would we have? Always hiding, always afraid, never accepted by either world." "We could go north," Micah suggested, "to Boston or New York. Things are different there." "Are they?" Grace asked skeptically. "Different enough that a white man and a black woman could live openly as husband and wife, could have children, why, wouldn't be rejected by both races." Micah didn't answer immediately, and Grace knew he was struggling with the same reality she had been forced to confront. "I can't ask you to give up everything for me," she continued. "Your family, your inheritance, your place in society. What if I'm willing to give those things up?" Micah challenged. "What if they mean nothing to me compared to a life with you?" Grace shook her head. "You say that now, but in time, you would resent me for it, and I would hate myself for being the reason you lost so much." Micah took her hands in his. "Grace, look at me," he said, his voice intense. "I love you, not just as a passing fancy or a forbidden excitement. I love your strength, your dignity, your talent, your heart. I have never felt this way about anyone, and I don't believe I ever will again." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, but I do. That's why I have to let you go." She pulled her hands away and turned to leave, but Micah caught her arm. "No," he said firmly. "I won't accept that. We'll find a way, Grace. Together." Before she could respond, the library door opened. They sprang apart, but it was too late. Mrs. Thorne stood in the doorway, her face a mask of shock and disgust. "So it's true," she said, her voice shaking. "All the whispers, all the rumors. My stepson and a slave." "Former slave," Micah corrected automatically. "And yes, it's true. I love Grace, and she loves me." Mrs. Thorne laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Love? You call this love? This is madness, Micah. Utter madness." "Catherine," Micah began, but she cut him off. "Don't Catherine me," she snapped. "I tried to prevent this. I offered her money to leave, but she refused. And now look what's happened. Our home attacked, our reputation in tatters, and you declaring your love for a Negro woman in my husband's library." "I should go," Grace said, moving toward the door. "Yes, you should," Mrs. Thorne agreed venomously. "You should have gone days ago, weeks ago, before you ruined everything with your song and your seduction." "That's enough," Micah said, his voice rising. "You will not speak to her that way. Grace has done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong," Mrs. Thorne repeated incredulously. "She has bewitched my hussy, banned into freeing our slaves, costing us a fortune. She has turned you against your own kind. She has brought violence and scandal to our door. And you say she has done nothing wrong? Catherine, what's going on here?" Mr. Thorne appeared in the doorway behind his wife. "I could hear you shouting from my study." Mrs. Thorne whirled to face her husband. "I caught them, Harold, your son and that girl, declaring their love for each other in our library." Mr. Thorne looked from Micah to Grace, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said after a moment. "You see?" Mrs. Thorne exclaimed. "Is that all you have to say? Your son is talking about throwing away his future for a former slave, and all you can say is, 'I see.'" "What would you have me say, Catherine?" Mr. Thorne asked wearily. "That I'm shocked? I'm not. That I'm angry? I don't know if I am. Have you all gone mad?" Mrs. Thorne demanded. "Has that girl is singing addled your brains?" "Perhaps it has," Mr. Thorne admitted. "Or perhaps it has cleared them. I don't know anymore, Catherine. I only know that nothing seems as simple as it once did." Mrs. Thorne stared at her husband in disbelief. "Well, if you won't put a stop to this, I will," she declared. "I'm leaving, Harold. I'm going to stay with my sister in Charleston until you come to your senses, if you ever do." She stormed out of the library, leaving G in uncomfortable silence in her wake. "Father," Micah began, "I can explain." Mr. Thorne held up a hand. "Not now, Micah. We'll discuss this tomorrow, when tempers have cooled." He turned to Grace. "You should return to your quarters, Grace. It's been a long day for all of us." Grace nodded, relieved to be dismissed. As she passed Mr. Thorne, he said quietly, "For what it's worth, I believe you two truly care for each other. But Catherine is right about one thing. The world is not ready. Not yet." Grace made her way back to her room, her emotions in turmoil. In the space of an hour, she had admitted her love for Micah, been confronted by Mrs. Thorne, and received an unexpected hint of understanding from Mr. Thorne. It was too much to process all at once. Martha was waiting for her, concern written on her weathered face. "What happened?" "The whole house is talking about Mrs. Thorne storming off to pack her bags." Grace sank onto her bed, suddenly exhausted. "She caught me and Micah in the library. We were talking." "Talking," Martha repeated skeptically. "And what were you talking about that got her so fired up?" "Love," Grace admitted quietly. "We were talking about love." Martha sat down beside her. "Oh, child." "I told him it was impossible," Grace said, tears filling her eyes. "I was trying to do the right thing, to let him go. And then Mrs. Thorne came in and heard everything. And now she's leaving," Martha concluded. "Going to her sister's, they say. Grace nodded. She thinks we've all gone mad. Maybe we have. Not mad, Martha said gently. Just brave. Or foolish. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Grace lay awake most of the night, replaying the events of the evening in her mind. Micah loved her. She loved him. She had said the words out loud, and there was no taking them back now. But what did it mean? Where could they possibly go from here? Morning came too soon, bringing with it the news that Mrs. Thorne had indeed left for Charleston on the early train. The house felt different without her presence, less tense in some ways, but also unsettled, as if a storm was brewing just over the horizon. Grace was summoned to Mr. Thorne's study after breakfast. She found him sitting behind his desk, looking tired but composed. "Sit down, Grace," he said, gesturing to a chair. She sat, hands folded in her lap, waiting for whatever was to come. "I want to talk to you about what happened last night," Mr. Thorne began. "About you and Micah." "Yes, sir," Grace said, bracing herself for anger or disappointment. "Do you love my son?" Mr. Thorne asked directly. Grace was startled by the bluntness of the question. Yes, sir, I do," she answered honestly. "But I know it's impossible. I told him so last night, before Mrs. Thorne came in." Mr. Thorne nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "And yet, he loves you. He told me so this morning in no uncertain terms." "I'm sorry, sir," Grace said, not knowing what else to say. "Don't be sorry for love, Grace," Mr. Thorne said, surprising her. "Love is a rare and precious thing in this world, too rare to be thrown away because of society's rules." Grace stared at him, not sure she was understanding correctly. "Sir?" Mr. Thorne leaned forward. "When you sang that night, something changed in me, something I can't fully explain, but I felt connected. To you, to everyone in that room, to something larger than myself. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds of Darlington Hall. "I've been thinking a lot about what that means, about the kind of man I want to be, the kind of world I want to live in." He turned back to face her. "I won't pretend it would be easy. You and Micah would face enormous challenges, dangers even, but if you truly love each other, if you're willing to fight for that love," he paused, "I won't stand in your way." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Thorne, are you saying you approve?" "I'm saying I understand," he clarified, "and that sometimes the heart knows better than the head what is right." Before Grace could respond, there was a knock at the door. Thomas entered, looking agitated. "Sir, there's a group of men at the front gate. They're demanding to speak with you." Mr. Thorne frowned. "What men? What do they want?" "They say they're from the Citizens Committee," Thomas explained nervously. "They say they have questions about what's been happening here." Mr. Thorne's expression hardened. "Tell them I'll be right there." As Thomas left, he turned back to Grace. "Stay inside. Keep out of sight. I'll handle this." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. The Citizens Committee was known for taking matters into their own hands when they felt the law was protecting their way of life. "Please be careful, sir," she said as Mr. Thorne headed for the door. He paused, looking back at her with a strange, sad smile. "You know, Grace, I think I'm finally doing something worth being careful about." Grace watched anxiously from the upstairs window as Mr. Thorne approached the group of men gathered at the front gate. There were about a dozen of them, all well-dressed in suits and hats, not the angry mob that had attacked the house, but in some ways more frightening because of their calm, organized appearance. "What do you think they want?" Martha asked, standing beside Grace at the window. "Nothing good," Grace replied. "The Citizens' Committee doesn't come calling unless they think someone's threatening their way of life." They watched as Mr. Thorne spoke with the men, his posture stiff but not intimidated. After several minutes, he opened the gate and led the group toward the house. "He's bringing them inside," Grace said, backing away from the window. "I should go—" "No," Martha stopped her. "You heard Mr. Thorne. Stay out of sight. Let him handle this." Reluctantly, Grace agreed. She and Martha moved to the upstairs hallway, where they could hear what was happening in the drawing room below without being seen. The men's voices drifted up, formal, but with an underlying hostility that made Grace shiver. "We've heard disturbing reports, Thorne," one man was saying, "about changes at Darlington Hall, changes that concern the entire community." "What I do on my own property is my business, gentlemen," Mr. Thorne replied evenly. "Not when it affects all of us," another voice countered. "You've freed your slaves, given them wages, even appointed one as some kind of entertainer." "Entertainment coordinator," Mr. Thorne corrected. "And yes, I have. It's perfectly legal." There was a murmur of voices, then a new speaker, his tone sharper. "And what about the rumors concerning your son, that he's formed an attachment to one of your former slaves?" Grace's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they must be able to hear it downstairs. "My son's personal life is not up for discussion," Mr. Thorne said firmly. "It is when it threatens the very foundation of our society," the man insisted. "If a Thorne can marry a Negro, what's to stop others from getting similar ideas? The entire social order would collapse." "No one said anything about marriage," Mr. Thorne pointed out. "But that's where it's heading, isn't it?" the first voice pressed. "We've heard things, Thorne, troubling things." There was a pause, and Grace could imagine Mr. Thorne choosing his words carefully. "Gentlemen," he finally said, "I understand your concerns, but times are changing. The war changed everything. We can't go back to the way things were, no matter how comfortable that might be for some of us." "So you admit it?" someone demanded. "You're deliberately undermining our way of life?" "I'm trying to build a new way of life," Mr. Thorne corrected, "one that recognizes the humanity in all people, regardless of color." The tension in the room was palpable even from upstairs. Grace and Martha exchanged worried glances. "We didn't come here to debate philosophy, Thorne," the lead voice said coldly. "We came to give you a warning. Bennett's trial starts tomorrow. If you or any of your employees testify against him, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thorne?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not a threat, a promise. For the good of the community, certain things must not be allowed to continue. Bennett understands that. We understand that. And you need to understand it too." There was the sound of chairs scraping as the men stood. "Think about your family, Thorne. About your reputation. About everything you've built. Is it worth losing all that for some misguided principle?" "Get out of my house," Mr. Thorne said, his voice shaking with anger. "All of you, now!" Grace and Martha quickly retreated to a bedroom as the sound of footsteps approached the hallway. Through a crack in the door, they watched as the men descended the St. Eyres and left, their faces grim with purpose. When the front door closed behind them, Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "This is bad," she whispered. "Very bad." Martha nodded, her expression grave. "They won't stop with threats. Men like that never do." They went downstairs to find Mr. Thorne in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Micah was with him, his face flushed with anger. "We should go to the federal garrison," Micah H. was saying. "Report the threat, ask for protection." "And what good would that do?" Mr. Thorne asked wearily. "The soldiers can't be everywhere, and the Citizens Committee has friends in high places. They're careful to keep their hands clean." He noticed Grace and Martha in the doorway. "You heard?" "Most of it," Grace admitted. "They don't want us to testify against Bennett." "They don't want us to do a lot of things," Mr. Thorne said grimly. "But they especially don't want you and Micah." He trailed off, looking between them. "To be together," Micah finished. "Well, that's not their decision to make." "Micah," Grace began, but he cut her off. "No, Grace. I'm tired of letting fear dictate our lives. I love you. You love me. That should be enough." "But it isn't," Grace said softly. "Not in this world." Mr. Thorne set down his glass. "Bennett's trial starts tomorrow. I've been called to testify, and so has Grace. We need to decide what we're going to do." "We're going to tell the truth," Micah said immediately. "We can't let Bennett get away with what he did." "Even if it puts us all in danger?" Martha asked. "Even if it costs lives?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Grace thought about her freedom paper, about the song that had changed everything, about Micah's declaration of love. So much had happened in such a short time. Could it all be undone just as quickly? "What if I didn't testify?" she suggested. "What if I left Darlington Hall just for a while? It might calm things down." No, Micah said forcefully. That's exactly what they want, to drive you away, to go back to the way things were. Micah's right, Mr. Thorne said, surprising Grace. Running away won't solve anything. It will only embolden them. Then what do we do? Grace asked. Mr. Thorne looked at her, thoughtful. Why? We stand our ground, we tell the truth, and we prepare for whatever comes next. That night, extra guards were posted around Darlington Hall. Trusted men from town who had worked for the Thorne family for years. Everyone was on edge, jumping at shadows, listening for sounds of approach. Grace couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the moonlit garden, thinking about all that had happened since the night she sang her mother's song. So much change, so much hope, and now so much fear. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Micah standing there, his face pale in the dim light. "Micah, you shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. "I had to see you," he said. "May I come in? Just for a moment?" Grace hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. It was improper, scandalous even, but after everything else that had happened, it hardly seemed to Martita. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her distance, very aware of the small bed that took up most of the room. Micah took a deep breath. "I have a plan," he said, "a way for us to be together." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of plan?" "After the trial, we leave," Micah explained. "Not just you, all of us. Father, the servants, everyone who wants to come. We go north to Boston. Father has business connections there. We could start over." Grace sent-eyed at him in disbelief. "Leave Georgia? Leave Darlington Hall? Your father would never agree to that." "He already has," Micah said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I spoke with him after you left. He sees it's the only way. Things are changing too slowly here. Up north, we'd have a chance." Grace sat down on the edge of her bed, trying to process what Micah was saying. Leave everything she had ever known. Go to a strange city where she might still fake a prejudice, but of a different kind. "What about Martha? Thomas? The others?" she asked. "Like I said, anyone who wants to come can come," Micah assured her. "Father will help them find jobs, places to live." "And us?" Grace asked quietly. "What about us?" Micah knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "We'll be together," he said simply. "However we can. Maybe not married right away. Even in Boston, that would be difficult, but together. Building a life." It sounded like a dream, too beautiful to be real. "Do you really think it could work?" "I do," Micah said with conviction. "It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. "This was my mother's," he explained. "Father gave it to me tonight. He said she would have wanted you to have it." Grace's eyes filled with tears as Micah slipped the ring onto her finger. It was simple. A band of silver with a small pearl, but to Grace it was more precious than the finest diamond. "This isn't a formal engagement," Micah clarified. "Not yet, but it's a promise that whatever happens, whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Grace looked at the ring shining on her finger, then at Micah's earnest face. Could they really do this? Could they really find a way? "I promise," she whispered, and sealed her words with a kiss. Morning came all too quickly. Kaylee. Grace dressed carefully for the trial, wearing her best dress and the ring Micah had given her, though she kept it hidden with a pair of gloves. She wasn't ready for the world to know about their promise, not yet. Mr. Thorne, Micah, and Grace traveled together to the courthouse in town. The streets were unusually crowded. People gathered to watch the proceedings of what had become a sensational case. A white plantation owner defending his former Slavis against a respected slave trader. It was unprecedented. Inside the courthouse, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Bennett sat at the defendant's table, looking confident despite the charges against him. His friends from the Citizens Committee filled the gallery, their faces hostile. Judge Harmon presided, his expression giving nothing away as he called the court to order. "We are here today to determine whether Mr. James Bennett and his associates are guilty of breaking and entering, destruction of property, and assault. How do the defendants plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Bennett's lawyer answered. My clients were simply trying to recover stolen property. Stolen property, Mr. Thorne muttered under his breath. Is that what they're calling it now? The prosecution presented its case first, calling Mr. Thorne to the stand. He testified calmly but firmly about the night of the attack, describing how Bennett and his men had broken into Darlington Hall, damaged property, and assaulted several people. And why do you believe Mr. Bennett carried out this attack? The prosecutor asked. Because I had freed my slaves, Mr. Thorne answered simply. Mr. Bennett didn't approve. He wanted me to sell them to him instead. Bennett's lawyer cross-examined Mr. Thorne aggressively, trying to paint him as a radical who was undermining the social order. But Mr. Thorne held his ground, refusing to be intimidated. Then it was Grace's turn to testify. As she made her way to the witness stand, she could feel the hostility radiating from Bennett and his supporters. She took the oath with a steady voice, determined to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked her to describe what happened the night of the attack. Grace did so clearly and concisely, explaining how she had fled into the woods on Micah's instructions, how Martha had found her, and how they had watched the soldiers arrive from their hiding place. And why do you think Mr. Bennett was looking for you specifically? The prosecutor asked. Grace hesitated, glancing at Micah. He had made threats against me earlier that day, she explained. He didn't approve of my position at Darlington Hall. Your position as entertainment coordinator, the prosecutor clarified. Yes, Grace nodded. And as a free woman? Bennett's lawyer approached for cross-examination, his expression contemptuous. Miss Grace, if that is indeed your name, isn't it true that you were born a slave? Yes, sir, Grace acknowledged. And isn't it also true that you have used certain charms to influence the men of the Thorne household? Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning is irrelevant and offensive. Sustained, Judge Harmon ruled. Counsel, confine your questions to the events of the night in question. The defense lawyer changed tactics. Miss Grace, do you deny that you were seen alone with the younger Mr. Thorne on multiple occasions? Again, the prosecutor objected, and again the judge sustained it. But the damage was done. The whispers in the gallery grew louder. The accusation had been made public. After Grace stepped down, several other witnesses testified. Thomas, who had gone for the soldiers, the captain who had arrested Bennett, even Martha, who described finding Grace in the woods and watching the attack from hiding. Throughout it all, Bennett sat smugly, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. When it was his turn to testify, he painted himself as a concerned citizen, worried about the unusual activities at Darlington Hall. I had heard rumors, he told the court, disturbing rumors about Mr. Thorne's son forming an unnatural attachment to one of the slave girls. I went to investigate, to talk sense into my old friend. And did that investigation include breaking down his door and assaulting his household staff? The prosecutor asked dryly. Things got out of hand, Bennett admitted. Passions were running high, but I never meant any real harm. By the end of the day, all the evidence had been presented. Judge Harmon Ann announced that he would consider the case overnight and deliver his verdict the following morning. As they left the courthouse, Grace could feel eyes following them, hear the whispers. The accusations Bennett had made could not be unsaid. The idea of her and Micah together was now public knowledge, speculation spreading like wildfire. Keep your head high, Mr. Thorne advised as they walked to their carriage. You've done nothing wrong. But they think we have, Grace said softly, and that's all that matters to them. Back at Darlington Hall, they found a letter waiting. It was addressed to Mr. Thorne, but the contents concerned all of them. It's from Bennett's lawyer, Mr. Thorne explained as he read it. They're offering a deal. If we drop the charges, Bennett will leave us alone. No more attacks, no more interference. And if we don't? Micah asked. Mr. Thorne looked grim. Then they promised to expose the scandalous relationship between you and Grace to every newspaper in the South. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. They can't prove anything. There's nothing to expose. The truth doesn't matter, Mr. Thorne said wearily. The accusation is enough. It would ruin us socially, maybe even lead to violence. So what do we do, Micah asked. Give in to blackmail? Mr. Thorne looked at Grace, then at his son. That's not my decision alone. This affects both of you more than anyone. Grace thought about the ring hidden beneath her glove, about the promise she and Micah had made to each other. If the truth came out now before they could leave for Boston, the consequences could be devastating. "Maybe we should take the deal," she suggested reluctantly, "just until we can leave." "No," Micah said firmly. "If we back down now, they win. They'll know they can control us through fear." "But the Grace began. "The alternative is standing our ground," Micah insisted, "being true to ourselves and to each other, no matter what." They looked to Mr. Thorne, who had been silent, weighing the options. "Micah's right," he finally said. "We can't live in fear, and we can't let Bennett get away with what he did." The decision made, they tried to go about their evening as normally as possible. But there was a tension in the air, a sense that something momentous was about to happen. Before bed, Grace removed her gloves and looked at the silver ring on her finger. It represented so much: love, hope, promise, but also danger, uncertainty, fear. Was she strong enough for what lay ahead? Were any of them? She thought back to the night she had sung her mother's song, the night everything had changed. She had found her voice then, a voice that had broken through walls of prejudice and pain. Perhaps it was time to use that voice again, not just to sing, but to speak the truth, whatever the cost. The next morning, they returned to the courthouse. It was even more crowded than before, word having spread about the sensational accusations made during the trial. Grace kept her head high, though she could feel the hostile stares, hear the whispered insults. Judge Harmon entered, his face grave. "Before I deliver my verdict," he announced, "I want to address certain insinuations that were made in this courtroom yesterday. This trial is about specific criminal acts: breaking and entering, destruction of property, assault. It is not about the personal lives of the victims, which are their own private concern." A murmur ran through the gallery. Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Having said that," the judge continued, "I have considered all the evidence presented. I find the defendants, Mr. James Bennett and his associates, guilty of all charges." A shocked silence fell over the courtroom, followed by an eruption of voices. Bennett's supporters shouted in protest while others nodded in satisfaction. "Order!" Judge Harmon called, banging his gavel. "Order in the court!" When the noise subsided, he announced the sentence: 6 months in jail for Bennett, less for his accomplices, plus fines to cover the damage to Darlington Hall. As Bennett was led away in handcuffs, he glared at Grace with such hatred that she shrank back. "This isn't over," he spat. "Not by a long shot." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, eager for comments. Mr. Thorne spoke briefly, expressing satisfaction with the verdict and thanking the judge for his fairness. He did not address the rumors about Micah and Grace, nor did they linger to give the press a chance to ask. They returned to Darlington Hall to find the house in a state of excitement. The verdict had somehow reached the servants before they did, and everyone was celebrating Bennett's conviction. "Hey, it's a victory for all of us," Thomas declared. "Shows they can't just do whatever they want anymore." "Don't get too comfortable," Martha cautioned. "Bennett has friends, and a long memory." Her words proved prophetic. That evening, a rider arrived with a message for Mr. Thorne. His face darkened as he read it. "What is it, Father?" Micah asked. "A warning," Mr. Thorne replied, handing him the note. "Bennett's friends in the Citizens Committee are planning something. Tonight." Micah read the message quickly. "We need to leave. Now. All of us." "To where?" Mr. Thorne asked. "We can't all go to Boston tonight." "No, but we can go to Judge Harmon's estate," Micah suggested. "It's only a few miles away, and he has men who can help protect us." Mr. Thorne nodded. "Start packing. Only what you can carry. And tell the servants to do the same. Anyone who wants to come with us can. The rest should leave too. It's not safe to stay here." The house erupted into activity as everyone prepared to flee. Grace helped Martha gather her things, then returned to her own room to pack. As she was folding her freedom papers to put in her bag, she heard the sound of horses approaching. Many horses. She looked out the window and felt her blood freeze. A group of men on horseback, wearing hoods and carrying torches, was coming up the drive. The Citizens Committee had not waited for night. "They're here," she called, running into the hallway. "They're coming now." Micah appeared at the top of the stairs, his face grim. "How many?" "At least 20, Grace reported, all on horseback with torches." "We need to go," Micah said, taking her hand. "Now out the back way." They hurried downstairs to find Mr. Thorne already directing the evacuation. Servants were streaming out the back door toward the woods, carrying whatever they could. "Father, we need to go," Micah urged. "They're almost here." "You two go with the others," Mr. Thorne instructed. "I'll hold them off, buy you some time." "No," Micah protested. "We're not leaving you." "This isn't a debate, Micah," Mr. Thorne said firmly. "I built Darlington Hall. If it's to be destroyed, I'll be here to witness it. But you, Sarah and Grace need to get away. You're the future. Go to Boston. Start that new life we talked about." "Harold, don't be a fool," Martha said, appearing beside them. "They'll kill you." "Maybe," Mr. Thorne acknowledged. "Or maybe I can reason with them. Many of them are my neighbors, my friends." "Not anymore," Martha said grimly. "Not since you chose freedom over slavery. Not since your son chose love over prejudice." The sound of the hoofbeats was getting closer. They could hear shouts now, angry voices calling for justice, for retribution. "Go," Mr. Thorne said again, pushing Micah toward the door. "Now, that's an order." Grace could see the struggle on Micah's face, the desire to stay with his father battling the need to ensure her safety. "We'll get help," he finally promised. "We'll come back with the soldiers." "I know you will," Mr. Thorne said with a sad smile. "Now go." As they fled into the darkness of the woods behind Darlington Hall, Grace could see the first torches reaching the house. She clung to Micah's hand, her heart pounding with fear and grief. "We can't leave him," she gasped as they ran. "We can't." "We have to," Micah said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's what he wanted, and he's right. We need to survive this, for him, for us, for the future. Us." They reached the edge of the woods where the other servants had gathered. Thomas had managed to secure 2 wagons, and everyone was climbing aboard. "What about Mr. Thorne?" Thomas asked, looking back toward the house. "He stayed behind," Micah said, his voice breaking. "To buy us time." A collective gasp went up from the group. They all knew what that likely meant. "We need to get to Judge Harmon's," Micah continued, helping Grace into one of the wagons. "He'll send men to help Father." As the wagons began to move, Grace looked back at Darlington Hall. From this distance, she could see figures moving around the house, torches lighting up the night. Then, to her horror, she saw flames beginning to lick at the walls. "They're burning it," she whispered. "They were burning Darlington Hall." Micah put his arm around her, his face reflecting the distant firelight. "Let it burn," he said softly. "It's just a house." "But your father—" "My father made his choice," Micah said, though his voice shook. "He chose what he believed was right, even knowing the cost." The wagons rumbled through the night, carrying them away from the only home most of them had ever known. Grace thought about her freedom papers, safely tucked in her bag, about the silver ring on her finger, about the song that had started it all. They reached Judge Harmon's estate just before midnight. The judge himself came out to meet them, alarmed by their arrival. "Darlington Hall is burning," Micah explained quickly. "The Citizens Committee. My father stayed behind." "Dear God," the judge muttered. He turned to his butler. "Rouse the men and send someone to alert the federal garrison." As the judge's men rode off toward Darlington Hall, the refugees were welcomed into the house. They were given food, blankets, places to rest. But rest was impossible for Grace and Micah. They sat together on a bench in the judge's garden, watching the distant glow of the fire that was consuming their past. "What happens now?" Grace asked, her head on Micah's shoulder. "We wait," Micah replied. "For news of my father, for mourning, for whatever comes next. And then we go to Boston just as we planned." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the silver ring. "We start a new life, together." Grace looked at their hands, hers dark, his light, joined together despite everything the world had done to keep them apart. "Do you really think we can? That it's possible?" "I do," Micah said with conviction. "I have to believe that. After everything we've been through, I have to believe that love can win." They sat in silent sea, watching the night sky, waiting for dawn. Whatever the morning brought, news of Mr. Thorne, plans for the future, challenges yet to face, they would meet it together. The song that had broken the room, broken through walls of prejudice and pain, had led them here, to this moment, to each other. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Grace started to sing. Softly at first, then with growing strength, the same song she had sung that night at Darlington Hall. A song of sorrow, of strength, of stars that guided the way to freedom. Micah joined his voice to hers, the words unfamiliar to him, but the feeling clear. Others came out to listen. Martha, Thomas, Judge Harmon himself. And for a moment, just a moment, they were all connected by the music, by something larger than themselves. As the song ended, a rider appeared on the road. One of the judge's men returning from Darlington Hall. They all held their breath, waiting for news. "Mr. Thorne is alive," the man called as he dismounted. "The soldiers arrived in time. He's injured, but he'll recover." Relief washed over all of them, but especially Micah, who closed his eyes in silent thanks. "And the house?" Judge Harmon asked. "Badly damaged, but not destroyed," the rider reported. "The soldiers managed to save most of it." It was more than they had dared to hope for. Mr. Thorne was alive. Darlington Hall, though damaged, still stood. And they were all free, truly free, to build whatever future they chose. Later that day, they rode back to what remained of Darlington Hall. The grand old house was scorched and battered, windows broken, parts of the roof collapsed. But like them, it had survived. Mr. Thorne was in his bedroom, a bandage around his head and his arm in a sling. But his eyes were clear and alert as Micah and Grace entered. "You see aim back," he said, smiling weakly. "Of course we did," Micah replied, taking his father's good hand. "Did you think we wouldn't?" "I hoped you'd be on your way to Boston by now," Mr. Thorne admitted, "somewhere safe." "We couldn't leave without knowing you were all right," Grace said, "and without saying thank you. For everything." Mr. Thorne reached out his good hand to her. "No, Grace, I should be thanking you. Your song opened my eyes, made me see what I'd become, what we'd all become." "What happened last night?" Micah asked. "The soldiers said you confronted the mob alone." Mr. Thorne nodded. "I tried to reason with them. Some of these men were my friends. We fought together in the war, did business together for years. I thought if I could just make them understand." "But they didn't want to understand," Grace said softly. "No," Mr. Thorne agreed. "They wanted things to stay the way they were. The WA that benefited them." He coughed, wincing with pain. "When they started the fire, I tried to stop them. That's when they attacked me." "How you could have been killed," Micah said, his voice tight with emotion. "Yes," Mr. Thorne acknowledged, "but I wasn't. The soldiers arrived just in time." He looked around at what remained of his bedroom, the scorched walls and smoke-damaged furniture. "Darlington Hall can be rebuilt, and so can our lives." A week later, with Mr. Thorne well enough to travel, they prepared to leave for Boston. Most of the servants had chosen to go with them, preferring an uncertain future in the north to the dangers they now faced in Georgia. Martha supervised the packing, making sure everything essential was safely stowed in the wagons. "Never thought I'd leave this place," she mused as she worked alongside Grace. "Been here most of my life." "Are you scared?" Grace asked. "Terrified," Arthur admitted with a small smile, "but excited too. Free and headed north. Never thought I'd see the day." Grace understood exactly how she felt. The future was full of unknowns, but for the first time, it was truly her future to shape. The night before their departure, Grace stood in the damaged drawing room where she had sung her song all those weeks ago. The room was mostly empty now, the furniture either destroyed in the fire or packed for the journey. But she could still feel the echoes of that night, the moment when everything changed. Micah found her there, gazing out the broken window at the stars. "Saying goodbye?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "In a way," Grace nodded. "This room changed my life. Changed all our lives." "No," Micah corrected gently. "You changed our lives, Grace. Your voice, your courage, your heart." Grace turned to face him. "What will happen when we get to Boston?" "Really?" Micah took her hands in his. "I don't know exactly. Father has business contacts there who can help us get settled. I'll finish my law studies. You'll sing, professionally, I hope. The others will find work, build new lives. And us? Grace pressed. Will we really be able to be together, even in Boston? It won't be easy, Micah admitted. There will still be prejudice, still be people who don't understand. But yes, I believe we can find a way. He'd ouched the silver ring on her finger. This is my promise to you. Whatever happens, we face it together. Grace thought about all they had been through, all they had risked, all they had lost and gained. Together, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The journey north was long and difficult. They traveled by wagon, then by train, then by steamship up the coast. Mr. Thorne had sold what remained of Darlington Hall to Judge Harmon, who promised to maintain it as a symbol of change in the South. Mrs. Thorne had chosen to stay with her sister in Charleston, unable to accept the new life her husband had embraced. The divorce papers had been filed before they left Georgia. When they finally reached Boston, it was early autumn. The trees were beginning to turn, painting the city in shades of gold and red. They settled into a large house Mr. Thorne had purchased in a progressive neighborhood where they were old face less scrutiny. Martha became the housekeeper, Thomas the butler, and the other former slaves took on various roles in the household or found employment elsewhere in the city. Mr. Thorne established a new business importing goods from Europe, while Micah enrolled at Harvard Law School. And Grace? Grace found her voice in more ways than one. She began singing in small gatherings, then at concerts, her unique style and powerful voice quickly gaining attention. People were moved by her songs, just as Mr. Thorne had been that night at Darlington Hall. There were challenges, of course. Prejudice existed even in Boston. Not everyone approved of the close relationship between Grace and Micah, or of Mr. Thorne's unconventional household. But they faced these challenges together, drawing strength from each other and from the journey that had brought them there. 6 months after their arrival in Boston, Grace gave a concert at a prestigious music hall. The audience was mixed, white and black, rich and poor, young and old, all drawn by the woman whose voice was said to break rooms with its beauty and power. Backstage before the performance, Micah found her pacing nervously. "Are you ready?" he asked. Grace nodded. "I think so. But this is different from singing in someone's parlor. There are hundreds of people out there. And they're all going to love you," Micah assured her, "just like I do." He kissed her quickly, then moved to join his father in the front row. Grace took a deep breath, straightened her new gown, a gift from Mr. Thorne, and stepped onto the stage. The hall fell silent as she began to sing. It was the same song she had sung that night at Darlington Hall, the song her mother had taught her, the song about freedom and stars and finding your way home. But now it was different. Now she sang not from a place of sorrow and longing, but from a place of hope and triumph. When the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then building to a thunderous roar. The audience rose to their feet, handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes, faces shining with emotion. Grace looked out at the sea of faces and found Micah and Mr. Thorne in the front row, both standing, both applauding, both with tears in their eyes. And she knew that no matter what challenges still lay ahead, they had already won the most important battle. They had found their freedom, their voice, their home, not in a place, but in each other. 2 years later, in a small private ceremony attended only by close friends and family, Grace and Micah were married. Judge Harmon, who had traveled north especially for the occasion, performed the ceremony in the garden of their Boston home. "By the power vested in me," he proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As Micah kissed his bride, Mr. Thorne watched with pride and joy. The road had not been easy. There had been legal battles, social ostracism, even threats of violence, but they had persevered. At the small reception that followed, Martha raised a glass in toast. "To the song that broke the room," she said, smiling at Grace, "and to the hearts it changed forever." Everyone drank to that, knowing that the simple words captured something profound. A song had broken through walls of prejudice and pain. A voice had changed lives. Love had found a way. And as the sun set on their wedding day, Grace and Micah slipped away from the celebration to share a quiet moment alone. They stood in the garden looking up at the stars, the same stars her mother had told her would guide her way to freedom. "Are you happy?" Micah asked, his arm around her waist. Grace leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Even though it hasn't been easy? Even though we still face challenges?" "Because of those things," Grace corrected. "What we have means more because of what it cost us, what we fought for." Micah nodded, understanding perfectly. "Sing for me," he requested softly. "Just for me." And there, in the quiet of their garden, with only the Centaurs as witnesses, Grace sang. Not the song that had broken the room all those years ago, but a new song, one of love and hope and the future they would build together. A future that had begun with a voice, a song, and the courage to be heard. The end.